Kevin. I wanted to start by saying thanks for your feedback over my essay about the U.S. as a state-sponsored terrorist actor. And I thought you had a lot of really good ideas, and I thought you had a lot of really good criticism that I can take moving into my paper. Uh, and uh, to begin with, I think you mentioned the language of terrorist organizations and their videos that they've made about the U.S., about their feelings towards the U.S., about attacks on the U.S., or even how they plan to move forward in the relationship with the U.S., whether that's through threats or whether that's through dialogue. Um, and I think that that's a really good idea to bring that into my paper, that I can maybe bring in a speech by bin Laden that he's given. I know he's famous for the videos that he produced. So to show that a threat made by bin Laden was actually fairly similar to the threats made by the U.S., I think it'd be really beneficial for my paper going forward. You also mentioned Saudi Arabia and other countries that we don't necessarily always recognize as high in terrorism, but it's actually a terrorist hotbed. And I didn't mention that in my paper, and I think you had a really good idea to bring those in to show how the U.S. is not always condemning some of these terrorist organizations, some of these countries that harbor terrorists. Um, so, kind of exploring why the U.S. is willing to throw a country like Iraq under the bus or Afghanistan under the bus, and talking about how they are sponsoring terrorism when you could turn around and say, well, look what the U.S. is doing. The U.S. is allies with Saudi Arabia. We are recognizing them as a state that's respectable, and we're allied with them. Is it? I think it's important to explore whether that's because of financial reasons, whether that's because of cultural reasons, or whether there's an underlying relationship there that maybe needs to be explored. So I think that's another way that I could really benefit my paper that you pointed out. And so just to explore who the United States respects, who we disrespect, who we support, and who we don't support, and exploring that actual relationship rather than just who they are. So making the connection of why rather than just who or what. Um, Next, you talked about what Syrian fighters actually did wrong, and how the U.S. is intervening in Syria in the Syrian civil war. I think that's another really important topic, and I know in my paper I talked quite a bit about it, but I don't think I really went in depth into what Syrian rebels are actually doing, whereas I did when I talked about Nicaragua and the situation there. So basically, what happened in Syria, there's been chemical attacks in used by the Assad regime, and so the rebels are fighting back against the Assad regime, attempting to overthrow his government. The U.S. has actually, at different times, we've supported both sides of the conflict. We've supported the rebels, we've supported ISIS, we've supported the Assad regime. We go back and forth, and and I think it's really important to uh, realize why the U.S. supports these rebels that are really being just as violent or causing just as much conflict as some others that we condemn. So I think it's another important realization, knowing who we're actually supporting. And I think that's one way that I can improve my paper is by, and I know you kind of pointed out, is that I can kind of show where the U.S. stands on these different organizations. I can show that um, the U.S. is supporting violence from Assad. But then a couple weeks later, we might be supporting violence by the rebels, and we're kind of going back and forth on both sides. I know I actually just read an article the other day about how Trump has even gone back and forth, that Obama was siding with one group, and then Trump decided to side with the other. So that's the kind of situation, the kind of dilemma that we found ourselves in. And I think it's really important to understand how that sponsoring of violence and of terrorism really falls back on the U.S.'s shoulders. So again, I really appreciate your criticism, your critiques, and your compliments. So thank you for your video.